Hey everybody, Robot here from Vespa Motorsport and ScooterWest.com. So here I'm at the bench, or my glass display case. Not taking anything apart today, but if you're into vintage Vespas, just want to talk about the stock original clutches that came in the vintage Vespas. They pretty much all look the same or real similar. This pertains specifically to the large frame Vespas, 1959 and later, not the small frame Vespa like a Primavera or a 100 Sport Vespa 90. So pretty much a Vespa 125, a 150, a Rally 180, P200, Rally 200, and the Cosa. Cosa is a style of clutch, but the Cosa was a scooter that came out in the early 90s. I think I may have talked about it in a prior video, but they did come out with a new unique clutch, and I'll talk about that last. First of all, I'll pull out the different various clutches. Ferodo is like an aftermarket Italian supplier of brake and clutch components. They make a nice quality product. And here's the standard 7-spring clutch that you find on the Vespa P200. Part numbers 245-8305. You find it anywhere from a 1973 Rally 200 all the way to the P200s before they went to the Cosa style clutch, which was, I think, in the 2000s, if I recall, for the Vespa P200. So a little bit later in the video, I'm going to show how to take these all apart. And you can see there's what the clutch looks like. The springs are located under there, and you have the plates in there. This clutch belt isn't the complete clutch. It's actually a banded one. I'll talk about that a little later. You can see there's 6 springs. So if it's a 125 or a 150, typically they have a 6-spring clutch. I think with the 180 and the 200, they always had the 7-spring clutch. Some of the earlier stuff had some other unique stuff. I'm not talking about that. This is the more common rotary valve Vespas I'm going to talk about. But it would essentially be the exact same guts, just be a little bit smaller clutch plates, one less spring, and pretty much they go together identical, and they're built pretty much the same way. Same clutch springs. You can see one other difference is the pressure plate that would snap in here. The 200 style has a D shape that kind of keeps it in place, while the smaller one is a round shape. So there are 2 different part numbers. Technically, you could use the one from the 200 and put it into the smaller clutch. So larger clutch, you got more surface area. The downside's got more weight to it. Just holds up better. That's why they built a slightly larger clutch. It has a little bit more clamping force, just having one more spring. But there is a reason sometimes you build up a motor with the cylinder kit and use a smaller clutch. A lot of the old race setups, before there was all these trick clutches out there, you would actually go to the smaller 125 clutch because it's just a lighter weight clutch in conjunction with heavier springs and a reinforced basket. You can see that's actually not ever original, is this strap that's on here. This is available as a basket that's already made, or you could actually buy the band that goes around a clutch and weld it yourself to reinforce the basket. The only reason you want to do this is if you have a high performance setup that revs really high, and the higher RPMs will cause these fingers to start expanding, and the clutch kind of explodes in the engine. I have seen on stock setups where they explode sometimes as well, but if they're not abused, they usually work pretty good. Heck, ride a Rally 200, I've ridden it, thousands of miles, and it still is just on original part. So, so pretty much that's the main differences between the 2 clutches that you find in 1959 all the way up to the 2000s. Either 7-spring or 6-spring. When the Cosa came out, I think that was in 1988, if I recall, they had just the regular P200 clutch. But I think by 92, the Mach 2 Cosa, 91 or 92, they came out with a new clutch design. And it was kind of the first time they redesigned the clutch on a Vespa for decades. The best part about the Cosa clutch is you can retrofit it into any of the older models. So it's kind of already oiled up, ready to install. And you can see it kind of looks a lot different. You can see this hub in the middle is much larger. We'll take it apart, I'll show you how it all works. They actually use much smaller springs. You can actually get heavier duty springs for this Koza clutch. Same with if you're building up the little clutch, you could buy Malossi springs. I don't have them out here, but they're a larger spring. I'll show you when it's all apart. And they have one extra plate in there that they were able to put in there. But this clutch can be retrofit into a P200. The other difference you can see is they always have a gear for the primary gear. That's available in several different teeth counts. Typically the 200s, the stock gearing, it would be, I think, 2364 if I recall. So this is 23 teeth right here. The smaller engines, they usually have smaller teeth count because the top speed's not as high and you want to have lower gear ratios. So this is possible to change out the gear ratios. Malossi also does make overdrive and underdrive gear ratio kits that change these. The best part is you could easily change the gear ratio. You do have to match up the primary gear that's on the Christmas tree as well. I'm not going to get into that, but they are available in different gear ratios all the way from like 22, 21, 22. The most common being 21 or 23, but you could buy the actual hub, the different hubs that have different teeth counts. These ones are specific for the Koza. It is also possible to buy the ones for the older style clutch. So now for the fun part. We're going to take these two clutches apart and show how they're assembled. All right, so I'm going to take apart the stock garden variety Vespa clutch, just a standard clutch. You're going to need a clutch compressor. This is the original tool that's probably from the 60s. We sell one that looks pretty original. It's Tool CC for clutch compressor, or just search Scooter West for clutch compressor tool. So you can see it's got this little taper. That's actually for the small frame clutch. It's completely different than these styles. So you put that in there, drop this little piece on. That one's got the D shape, and you spin the wing nut onto the clutch. So I'm going to take this all the way down, get all these oily plates on this glass table here. So go ahead, just crank this down a little bit. And you can see things are shaking around in there. And there's this circlip. Every single one of these parts on these clutches are available as spare parts, specifically the plates. We do have kits on the Scooter West web store of complete sets of parts to rebuild these. Or like I showed you, the Ferroto makes a really nice replacement that's comparable to that original Vespa part. So you got this circlip right here. That's the first thing that comes out, and I used a little flat blade screwdriver to dig it out. You have the outer plate. Snaps out. You can see they're lined with a cork. And then a steel plate. A lot of times I'll just take that, probably not on a glass table, and you tap the whole set out. They're a little bit stuck together. They are under clamp force right there, and it's been sitting in the package, so you may need to use a little screwdriver to kind of separate these plates. Or another instance is the scooter's been sitting for years and years and the plates are just stuck together. So sometimes the plates will be a little bit stuck. You can get a little flat blade screwdriver under here. If you're replacing the cork plates, a lot of times it's just best to get these steel plates as well. This is a brand new clutch, so everything looks like new in it, of course. Sometimes they got a little burrs on the new parts, so sometimes they don't pop off all that easy. So I'm kind of just prying it up and get that steel plate off, and they're all identical. The cork plate, this is the inner cork plate, doesn't have the little wings on it. And then you have one more steel plate. So another steel plate, and the last cork plate. And here's the very last plate. It is possible to change that inner gear from this last plate, but usually just buy this as a whole assembly with the gear here. So the next parts of the clutch is you have this inner hub here. This bushing usually is on there pretty tight. It is replaceable. Sometimes as they wear out, they'll just spin on the steel inner bushing. This thrust washer right here is also a replaceable part. I'm not going to remove that bushing. It's still in good shape. Then you can release the tension on the spring. So go ahead and release that, unthread the tool. Make sure you don't get your fingers pinched. And what's under here? We got the plate. You got all the springs and the cups. They actually all just fall right out, just like that. And again, if you're rebuilding a clutch, typically if you're just rebuilding a clutch, you want to have a set of corks, steels, and the springs, and replace the thrust washer and this brass bushing if they are worn. Usually I check these parts, make sure everything has a good tolerance. There's not really a spec for it, but it kind of spins on that bushing. There's not a bunch of slop. It has a little bit of free play, and you can see there's a little gap between the plate there. So when you're reassembling this clutch, I'll leave that just like that. There is a hole right here. You want to make sure they're lined up. Sometimes they don't have that hole there, but you can kind of see how those are pretty close to lined up. They're not perfect, but that's, in some cases they're way off. So you got to find it where it's pretty close. And if it's got that little hole like this aftermarket clutch, that's the position it's going to go, just like that. And drop all the cups in there. Usually use new springs. And again, it's pretty much same effect if you have the smaller clutch, just 6 of these cups, 6 of the springs. Actually a little easier to assemble. I think they all line up, but since 7's kind of like this odd number, you got to get it lined up perfectly. While this one, you can drop this inner hub in any position on the smaller clutch, if I recall. So we'll drop that in. And before you go too far, I'll put the tool in here. There's a little trick. You just don't want to start cranking down on this all the way. We're going to leave it kind of where it's just keeping a little tension on the clutch. So just a little bit of tension. You want to get your little screwdriver in here and click these springs all into the grooves, so you can kind of drop them in. So there's 3. Of course, they're staying in these little cups. That's not a problem there, but you can kind of see down the holes as well. And at this point, let's go ahead and crank this all the way down until that bottoms out. Everything's kind of oily. That's normal. If you're assembling a clutch from new parts, you want to put like non-detergent 30 weight oil on everything, including the plates. You may even want to soak the plates overnight, the cork plates that is, to get that initial lubrication on them. So the thrust washer's in there. Drop this in place. That spins fine. It's not rubbing on anything. And we'll start with the first cork plate. So that kind of drops down like that. And a steel plate. Sometimes you may want to file these edges because they are a little bit hard. You could use, if you're going to reuse them, you put them on a glass table, make sure they don't rock, because when they're warped, they'll usually take up a shape like a cone a little bit, so they'll rock. Doesn't matter what position, but kind of line those up with those teeth. And this one's taking a little bit to get it to drop down onto that hub, and it may be worth filing it. My experience is after some use, they'll just free up anyways. And when they're a nice to use, worn out clutch, all this stuff falls apart really easy, is my experience. This brand new clutch, everything's a little on the tight side, and you have the last one, kind of just line it up. And then you got the last plate. Go ahead and drop that in just like that. And before you put the clip on, a lot of times I like to feel the edge of the clip, and you find one edge is a little sharper than the other edge, and you want the sharper edge facing out. So you want to push this clip right into this groove right here, the sharp edge facing up. and kind of look at it, push it all the way around, make sure it's all the way into the groove. And you use a flat blade screwdriver. And at this point, go ahead and release the pressure of the clutch here. So make sure it doesn't explode. Sometimes I'll give it a couple taps on a table. It will explode. If that clip's not seated, it will explode pretty violently because there's springs kind of pushing out on that clutch. One other thing to keep in mind is the original style clutch uses this little castle as a locking nut, and there's the nut for the clutch itself. So it uses a pretty unique type of nut. That full engine rebuild video I did years ago kind of shows how to assemble this. There's a special tool that locks up the clutch, and there's also a special tool that will spin that little nut and tighten it to, I think, around 30 foot-pounds, if I recall. So there's the standard clutch. And again, you could do mods like reinforce it with a band if you want to get handy and weld this yourself, or you could buy already reinforced clutch. Not any reason to do that unless you're doing a higher performance setup. Same with the clutch springs. I tend not to want to put heavier clutch springs unless I have an issue with clutch slippage. There's also the clutch bell. The installed height of the clutch, these are all engineered for the oil pump. They got the little bit smaller gear. The older clutches, I think this height is a little bit different. And there's different spacer washer thicknesses, whether it's a oil pump drive gear or the older ones just have a thin thrust washer and they typically have a little bit thicker gear. You gotta get that installed height correct when you install clutch, especially when you're retrofitting a newer clutch into an older scooter that doesn't have oil injection. So on to the Koza clutch. Pretty much comes, it's designed to be a direct bolt-in, just the parts are all a little different. Same clutch compressor tool works with no issues here. And just go ahead and crank it down. And it's much easier to crank down. The reason being is the Koza clutch has much lighter springs. They're smaller springs. It's got 8 of them in the middle. The best feature of the Koza clutch is it's got a very light clutch feel. And in their stock form, they don't hold up all that well to the high power applications, but they can be easily modified the hold up to higher power applications. Along with putting clutch springs that are stronger. These are suitable for 18 to 22 horsepower. So if you're building up a Melosi kitted 210 or something, that would be an ideal setup. But pretty much the same idea. It's got a clip. I think that's the same part. And you can carefully flip it over. All the plates are just gonna drop right out. And you can see there's no springs on the outside. There's more room now to put more plates in this scooter. It's got a similar thrust washer at the bottom. This brass bushing is identical. It's kind of stuck on there, but it is possible to remove that. That only goes on one way. And you got that hub. Like I said, you could change out the gear ratios by replacing this center hub here. And the last plate is a nice thick plate. The cork, a thinner steel plate, another cork, another thin steel plate, a cork, one more thin steel plate, and the last cork that has only cork on one side. So that's the buildup of that clutch. Take this apart, I'll show you the springs in here. So in some ways it's a much simpler setup. So you get the clutch tool out and you have that inner hub, and there's nothing to really line up like little cups or anything. You can just see it's got this machined inner hub that kind of lines up with the teeth. So you kind of just line it up. You could change out those springs, they're just sitting on pegs in there. To compress it, kind of hold it all together, and then get the compressor started. Make sure it doesn't bind up. And pretty much goes together. Very similar to the original clutch that was found in Vespas since 1959 or even earlier. And So the hub goes on there. Again, you'd probably want to put some oil. I'm going to flip this whole stack over. Start with that nice thick steel plate. Again, all these plates are available as either sets or individually. Again, everything's oiled with like non-detergent oil, or something like a modal trans oil would be a good suitable product. And that's pretty much the clutch stack. Pretty simple. These parts almost look more like what you'd find in like an automotive automatic transmission, kind of a similar build. And you get the clip in there, make sure it's snapped all the way in. I kind of got that sharper edge facing up, and carefully release the pressure on the clutch. Remove the tool. And the way this clutch is attached to the crankshaft is a little different. You don't use this style. There's a wave washer that drops in there. That's actually a little small. It's supposed to be a 12mm wave washer, but there's a specific Piaggio part. And there's this swaged lock nut. You can see it's distorted on the end. Probably want to replace this after you remove it 1 or 2 times, or put like red Loctite on it. Again, about 30 foot-pounds, a little easier to use than that original setup. You can't use this newer setup on the older clutches because the inner diameter is much smaller. So there you have it, the large frame clutches and how to take them apart and rebuild them. Hope that found that pretty informative, whether you're just watching it for the fun of it or you have a shifty large frame Vespa and you're just curious how the parts go together. You can find all these parts, either the complete assemblies or individual parts, on the Scooter West web store, or complete clutch kits that include all the plates and the specific tools that you need to successfully rebuild a clutch. We'll see you in the next one. Robot here from Vespa Motorsport and ScooterWest.com.